I still remember the exact moment my life shattered into a million pieces. It was a crisp October morning. I was standing in my kitchen staring at the pregnancy test in my trembling hands. Two pink lines that confirmed what I'd been suspecting for weeks. After 3 years of marriage to Thomas, I was finally pregnant. We'd been trying for so long, and I was mentally rehearsing how I would tell him the news that evening. That's when the doorbell rang. I remember tucking the test into my pocket, smoothing down my sweater, and walking to the door with this strange floating sensation. Like the universe was smiling at me for once. I opened the door, still wearing that ridiculous smile. And there she stood, a woman I'd never seen before. Tall, auburn hair, expensive coat despite the worn edges. But it wasn't her that made my blood freeze. It was the two children clutching her hands. A boy around 5 and a little girl no older than 3. The boy had Thomas's eyes. The exact same hazel green eyes that I'd fallen in love with. The girl had his smile. "Are you Mrs. Penelope Blackwell?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. I nodded, unable to find words. "I'm Audrey. Audrey Wilson." She took a deep breath. "I think we need to talk about Thomas." I don't remember inviting them in. I just remember suddenly we were all sitting in my living room. The living room Thomas and I had painstakingly decorated together. Our wedding photo stared down from the mantel as this woman sat on our couch. Her children, Thomas's children, quietly playing with toys she'd brought in a small backpack. "He's been with us for 6 years, she said. Not with malice, just resignation. "He lives with us 4 days a week. He told me you travel frequently for work. I was an accountant. I rarely left the city. He said you two had separated but kept it quiet for family reasons." She twisted a tissue in her hands. "I just found out last week that was a lie." My mouth felt like sandpaper. "How did you find out?" "I saw your anniversary post on social media. The one where you wrote about 3 beautiful years together." She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. That's when I realized everything was a lie. The children were quietly building with blocks on my carpet. Thomas's children. Children who existed in a parallel life while I was desperately trying to conceive. "Why are you here?" I finally managed to ask, though I already knew. "He disappeared 3 weeks ago, stopped answering calls. His phone is disconnected. He withdrew most of our savings before he vanished." She handed me an envelope. "These are medical bills for Henry's asthma treatments. He promised he'd pay them. The collection agencies are calling daily." I stared at the envelope but didn't take it. "I'm not here to ruin your life," she continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I didn't know about you until last week. I thought we were building a life together." The little girl, I later learned her name was Lily, looked up at me with curious eyes. "Are you Daddy's friend?" she asked innocently. Something cracked inside me. I felt the pregnancy test in my pocket like a burning coal. 6 years. 6 years of this double life while I had trusted him completely. While I had given him access to everything, including the inheritance my grandmother had left me. "He's not here," I said mechanically. "I haven't seen him since yesterday morning." Audrey nodded slowly. "I thought, maybe he'd come back to you." "Did he take things? Pack a bag?" I asked, my mind suddenly racing. "Yes," and emptied our joint account. I stood up abruptly and walked to our bedroom. His closet was half empty. His passport was gone from the safe. So was the emergency cash we kept there. When I returned to the living room, I noticed Audrey watching me with a strange expression. Part pity, part recognition. One betrayed woman recognizing another. "You didn't know either, did you?" she asked quietly. I shook my head, sinking back into my chair. "No, I had no idea." We sat in a strange, stunned silence, broken only by the innocent sounds of children playing. Children who had no idea their world was collapsing around them. "I have something to tell you too," I said, pulling the pregnancy test from my pocket. "I just found out this morning." Her eyes widened, then filled with tears. We both started crying then. Not dramatic sobs, but the quiet, devastating tears of women who suddenly realized they'd been living in carefully constructed fictions. "What are we going to do?" she whispered. I looked at the children, at this woman, at the shambles of my life, and something hardened inside me. A crystallization of rage, betrayal, and determination. "First," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, "we're going to find out where he went. And then," I took a deep breath, "we're going to find out exactly what he's taken from both of us." I didn't know it then, but that moment, that exact second when Audrey Wilson knocked on my door, would be the beginning of my resurrection. The next 2 weeks were a blur of discoveries, each one more devastating than the last. Audrey and I formed an unlikely alliance, sharing information over late-night phone calls after her kids were asleep. What emerged was a pattern of deception so elaborate it was almost impressive. Thomas hadn't just been living two lives, he'd been systematically draining both of them. I contacted our bank only to discover our joint accounts had been emptied. When I called my investment manager in a panic, his response chilled me. "Mrs. Blackwell, we proceeded with the portfolio liquidation as instructed in the paperwork you and your husband signed last month." "What paperwork?" I demanded. There was an uncomfortable pause. "The documents transferring your grandmother's inheritance investments to the offshore account. Your signature was notarized. My signature, forged. My grandmother's inheritance, nearly $2 million that I'd been carefully saving and investing, gone." I sat on my kitchen floor that night, surrounded by financial statements, loan documents, and property records. The picture they painted made me physically ill. For years, Thomas had been siphoning money from my accounts. Small amounts at first, then larger sums as he grew bolder. He'd taken out a second mortgage on our home, a home that was originally purchased with my inheritance money. My signature appeared on documents I'd never seen. When I told Audrey, she revealed her own discoveries. "He used my credit to take out loans for a property investment in Arizona," she said, her voice hollow. "Over $300,000. I never saw any property. The loans are in my name." I learned Thomas had convinced Audrey to quit her job as a nurse 3 years ago when Lily was born. "He said he made enough for both of us," she explained. "He wanted me home with the kids." It left her completely financially dependent on him. And now, with him gone, she was facing eviction, debt collectors, and no income. Between his two families, Thomas had constructed the perfect setup, using my money to fund his life with Audrey, presenting himself as the successful provider, while simultaneously convincing me that my inheritance needed to remain invested for our future family. "I gave him everything," I whispered one night, staring at our wedding photo. "My trust, my love, my future. I trusted him with my children," Audrey responded, her voice breaking. "Henry calls him Dad. He's the only father figure they've ever known." We both fell silent, absorbing the magnitude of what had been taken from us. As the days passed, I discovered more betrayals, subtler but equally painful. Friends who awkwardly admitted they'd seen Thomas with his family, but assumed I knew. A colleague who mentioned meeting Thomas and his wife at a restaurant on the other side of town. My brother-in-law who uncomfortably confessed he'd been sworn to secrecy about Thomas's situation. Everyone knew something was wrong, but no one had told me. They'd all chosen loyalty to Thomas over truth to me. The final blow came when I found a hidden email account on Thomas's old laptop. In it were messages to his parents who had always been warm and welcoming to my face. Messages describing how he was stuck in a marriage with me but staying for financial reasons. Messages where they sympathized with his predicament and asked about their real grandchildren, Audrey's kids. I called my mother-in-law, my hands shaking. "Penelope, dear," she said when she answered, her voice syrupy sweet. "How are you holding up?" "You knew," I said simply. The pause told me everything. "We didn't want to interfere in your marriage," she finally said. "You celebrated our wedding," I whispered. "You hugged me and welcomed me to the family, all while knowing about Audrey and the children." Thomas explained his situation to us. He said it was complicated, that you weren't ready to have children and he'd found someone who was. "We just wanted grandchildren, Penelope. Surely you can understand that." I hung up without another word. That night I sat in my empty bedroom, cradling my still flat stomach, feeling utterly alone. "I gave everything to them," I whispered to my unborn child, "and they discarded me like I was nothing." But something was happening inside me, a transformation born of necessity and rage. The tears eventually stopped, The shaking subsided, and in their place came a cold, clear focus. I was an accountant with a specialization in forensic accounting, a detail Thomas had apparently forgotten. I knew how to follow money trails. I knew how financial crimes were prosecuted. And most importantly, I had one advantage that Thomas never anticipated. I was pregnant with his child, but he had no idea. As I placed my hand on my stomach, I made a silent promise to my baby and to myself. He will not get away with this, and neither will anyone who helped him. I didn't confront anyone immediately. That would have been the old Penelope, emotional, reactive, wearing her heart on her sleeve. Instead, I became someone new, methodical, patient, and utterly focused on justice. First, I secured my position. I withdrew the maximum cash from my remaining personal account and opened a new account at a different bank under my maiden name. I changed all my passwords, froze my credit, and documented every fraudulent transaction I could find. Then I called in a favor from my college roommate, Alexis, now a partner at one of the city's most aggressive law firms. "This is beyond divorce territory," Alexis said after reviewing my documents. "This is criminal fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. I don't just want a divorce," I told her, my voice steady. "I want everything he has, everything he thinks he's entitled to." Alexis smiled, not a warm smile, but the predatory grin of a lawyer who loves a challenge. "Then let's get to work." While Alexis began preparing legal documents, I focused on tracking Thomas. This proved easier than expected. For someone who had orchestrated such elaborate deceptions, he was surprisingly careless about covering his digital footprint. His new credit card, opened with yet another identity theft from me, showed charges at a resort in Cancun. "He's on vacation?" Audrey asked incredulously when I told her. "While I'm about to be evicted?" "Not for long," I promised. What Thomas didn't know was that 3 years earlier, after we'd had a minor dispute over financial decisions, I'd created a contingency plan. I'd never truly trusted him after that incident. A small voice inside had warned me to protect myself. I'd established a separate LLC that held a portion of my inheritance. I'd documented every major transaction in our marriage. And most importantly, I'd maintained a separate email account where I'd forwarded suspicious communications from Thomas over the years, communications that now provided a damning timeline of his deceptions. I hadn't known why I was collecting this evidence then, some primal self-preservation instinct perhaps, but now it was the foundation of my counterattack. Next came the most delicate part of my plan. I needed to understand the full scope of Thomas's family wealth. His parents owned Blackwell Industries, a commercial real estate development company worth millions. Thomas was their only child and stood to inherit everything. They had already made him a 30% owner to minimize future estate taxes. Through carefully placed calls to former colleagues who worked with Blackwell Industries, I learned that the company was in the middle of a major development deal, one that would significantly increase its value but required maintaining a spotless reputation with investors. Their financing hinges on proving stable management and no adverse publicity, my source explained. Any hint of scandal could tank the deal. I filed this information away, another piece in my growing arsenal. Meanwhile, I helped Audrey document her own case. We discovered Thomas had listed himself as married on Henry's birth certificate but used a fake name. He'd claimed dependents on his taxes from both families. He'd even used Audrey's nursing credentials to obtain prescription medications fraudulently. "Did you know he had a gambling problem?" Audrey asked one evening. I froze. "What?" She showed me evidence of massive cash withdrawals at casinos over the past year, explaining where much of our money had actually gone. The picture of Thomas that emerged wasn't just of a cheater, but of a pathological liar with a gambling addiction who had methodically exploited everyone who trusted him. I hired a private investigator who specialized in financial fraud. Within a week, he had located offshore accounts where Thomas had hidden much of the stolen money. He'd also uncovered connections between Thomas's father and several questionable business deals. Nothing illegal enough for prosecution, but certainly embarrassing enough to threaten their precious development deal if made public. "You're not just building a divorce case," the investigator observed. "You're building leverage." "Exactly," I replied. By the 6th week after Audrey had appeared at my door, my plan was ready. I was nearly 12 weeks pregnant, just beginning to show, and had assembled a comprehensive legal strategy with Alexis. We'd prepared criminal complaints, civil lawsuits, and a divorce filing that detailed every fraudulent transaction. We'd documented the identity theft, the forgeries, and the financial abuse. But the true stroke of genius came from an unexpected source. Thomas's assistant at Blackwell Industries, Taylor, who contacted me after hearing rumors of his disappearance. "I've been keeping records," she confided during our discreet meeting at a quiet cafe. "He's been embezzling from the company for years. His parents cover it up every time. I have proof." "Why would you tell me this?" I asked cautiously. Taylor's eyes hardened. "Because 3 years ago, he promised to leave his wife for me. When I realized he was manipulating me, I started documenting everything. I've been waiting for the right moment." I smiled for the first time in weeks. "I believe that moment has arrived." The final piece fell into place when Alexis discovered that Thomas's parents had used my inheritance money, funneled through their son, as collateral for the loans on their development project. Money that was stolen from me was now tied directly to their company's future. "If we move quickly," Alexis explained, "we can file an injunction claiming interest in Blackwell Industries based on the fraudulent use of your funds. We can essentially freeze their entire development project." That night, I sat alone in my home office, reviewing the entire strategy. Every document was in order. Every legal filing was prepared. The prosecutor's office had been quietly briefed and was ready to file criminal charges. The financial regulators were prepared to investigate the offshore accounts. I placed my hand on my growing belly, feeling a flutter of movement for the first time. "Just a little longer," I whispered. "We're almost ready." The next morning, I received an alert from the bank monitoring service I'd established. Thomas had just booked a flight back to the United States. He was coming home, completely unaware that I had dismantled his entire world while he was gone. I picked up the phone and called Audrey. "It's time," I said. Thomas arrived home on a Tuesday evening, using his key as if nothing had happened. I was sitting in the living room, the house quiet and seemingly normal. I'd prepared for this moment, rehearsed it, visualized it, but nothing could have prepared me for the surge of cold fury that washed over me when he walked through the door. "Penny?" he called out casually, dropping his bags. "You home?" I didn't respond immediately, letting him walk further into the house. When he entered the living room, he stopped short at the sight of me sitting calmly in the armchair. "Hey," he said, his expression shifting to the charming smile I'd once loved. "I know you must be worried sick. My phone died in Mexico, and then there was this whole thing with my wallet getting stolen." The lies flowed effortlessly. "Sit down, Thomas," I said quietly. Something in my tone must have alarmed him because his smile faltered. "What's wrong? Did something happen while I was gone?" "You could say that," I replied, my voice steady. "Audrey Wilson came to visit. She brought Henry and Lily with her." His face drained of color so quickly I thought he might faint. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Penny, I can explain. Can you explain the second mortgage? Or the liquidation of my grandmother's inheritance? Or perhaps the offshore accounts in the Caymans?" I stood slowly. "Or maybe you'd like to explain the forged signatures, the identity theft, or the fraudulent tax returns." He took a step back. "You're confused. Things got complicated with investments. But I was protecting our future." "Our future?" I laughed, a sound without humor. "You mean your future with your other family? The one your parents consider their real grandchildren?" He switched tactics immediately, his expression morphing into contrition. "I made mistakes, Penny. Terrible mistakes. But I came back to fix things. To fix us." "There is no us anymore, Thomas." I walked to the side table and picked up a thick envelope. "This is a courtesy copy of what's being filed tomorrow morning. Divorce papers, criminal complaints for fraud and identity theft, civil suits for financial recovery, and an injunction against Blackwell Industries for using stolen funds as loan collateral." He lunged for the envelope, but I pulled it back. "You can get your own copy from the court," I said coldly, "along with the restraining order." "You're bluffing," he whispered, but his eyes darted nervously. "You have no proof." That's when I opened my laptop and played the recording, a conversation between Thomas and his father discussing how to handle Penny if she ever discovered the financial manipulations. A conversation Taylor had secretly recorded 6 months earlier. "You can't use that. It's illegal," he shouted. "Actually, this state has one-party consent for recordings. Taylor was part of the conversation," I explained calmly. "She's provided quite a collection of evidence." His face twisted with rage. "You stupid bitch. You have no idea who you're dealing with. My family will crush you." "Your family is finished, Thomas." I rested my hand on my stomach, now visibly rounded under my fitted dress. "And so are you." His eyes followed the gesture, widening in shock. "You're pregnant?" "Yes. And before you ask, yes, it's yours. And yes, I've already filed for full custody based on your abandonment and criminal activity." The doorbell rang. "That would be the police," I said. "The prosecutor moved up the arrest warrant after I informed them you had returned to the country. Flight risk, you understand." Everything happened quickly after that. The arrest in our living room, the media coverage that followed, Thomas's parents attempting to distance themselves but becoming entangled in their own web of financial improprieties once investigators started looking closely at Blackwell Industries. The court granted the injunction against the company's assets, halting their development project mid-construction. Their investors pulled out within days, sending the company into a financial tailspin. Thomas's father suffered a minor heart attack when federal agents arrived with a search warrant for the company offices. Audrey and I sat together in the courthouse after Thomas's bail hearing, watching him being led away in handcuffs. "He looks smaller somehow," she observed. She was right. Without his designer suits and confident swagger, stripped of his power to manipulate, Thomas appeared diminished. Just a man who had destroyed everything and everyone he claimed to love. The legal proceedings moved with surprising speed, aided by the mountain of evidence we had compiled, and Thomas's previous flight from the country. Faced with overwhelming proof and multiple felony charges, he accepted a plea deal that included significant restitution payments and 5 years in prison. But the true victory came in the civil settlements. With Alexis's brilliant legal maneuvering, I was awarded not only full recovery of my stolen inheritance, but also a 40% ownership stake in Blackwell Industries as compensation for my funds being used as collateral. Audrey received a substantial settlement for the fraudulent debts in her name and 5 years of child support payments held in trust. Thomas's parents, desperate to salvage something from the ruins of their reputation, signed over additional company shares to avoid further investigation into their financial practices. By the time the dust settled, I controlled 51% of Blackwell Industries. In our final face-to-face meeting, across a conference table surrounded by lawyers, Thomas looked at me with hatred. "You destroyed everything," he hissed. "My family's legacy. Everything we built." "No, Thomas," I replied calmly, one hand resting protectively on my 7-month pregnant belly. "You destroyed it. I'm simply rebuilding from the ashes." As I left the conference room that day, I passed his mother in the hallway. She stopped, her eyes fixed on my pregnancy. "That's my grandchild," she said softly. I met her gaze steadily. "No, this is my child. You lost the right to claim any connection when you chose to support your son's deceptions." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "We only wanted what was best for Thomas." "And now you have it," I replied. "He's exactly where he deserves to be." My daughter Catherine was born on a spring morning, almost exactly 1 year after Audrey had appeared at my door. She came into the world with a powerful cry that seemed to announce her presence, strong, determined, and wholly her own person from the very first breath. I didn't invite Thomas's family to the hospital. Their repeated attempts at reconciliation, motivated entirely by access to their grandchild and what remained of their company, had been met with my attorney's firm responses. They would have no relationship with my daughter unless she chose to know them when she was old enough to make that decision herself. Surprisingly, it was Audrey who became my closest ally through those early months of motherhood. Our shared trauma had created a bond that defied conventional explanation. Her children, Henry now 6 and Lily 4, adored baby Katie and appointed themselves her protectors. They need this as much as we do, Audrey observed one afternoon as we watched the children playing in my backyard. A family constructed from truth, not lies. I'd used part of my settlement to help Audrey establish her own pediatric home health service, building on her nursing experience. She now employed 8 nurses and was expanding into a second county. Her office was in one of the commercial buildings owned by Blackwell Industries, now renamed Phoenix Holdings under my majority ownership. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Thomas's deception had ultimately empowered both the women he had attempted to control. I returned to work when Catherine was 4 months old, taking my place as CEO of Phoenix Holdings. The company that had once represented generations of Blackwell men was now led by a single mother with a background in forensic accounting. I instituted transparency policies, ethical investment practices, and a zero-tolerance approach to financial improprieties. The whispers followed me, of course. The sidelong glances at industry events. The thinly veiled references to how I'd acquired my position. I let them talk. Their opinions meant nothing compared to the satisfaction of transforming a company built on deception into something legitimate and beneficial. Thomas wrote to me once from prison, a rambling letter alternating between apologies and subtle threats about what would happen when he was released. I didn't respond. His parents attempted to use intermediaries to negotiate visitation rights with Catherine. These efforts, too, were met with silence. Sometimes at night, when Catherine was asleep and the house was quiet, I would feel momentary pangs of what might have been. Not regret, never regret, but acknowledgement of the life I had once believed was mine. The marriage I thought was real. The love I had given so completely. On Catherine's first birthday, Audrey and her children joined us for a small celebration in my garden. As we watched the children laughing together, Audrey asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't knocked on your door that day?" I considered the question carefully. "I would still be living a lie," I finally answered. "And so would you. Sometimes I feel guilty for being happier now than I was with him," she confessed. "Is that strange?" "No," I replied. "We were both living half-lives, designed to accommodate his lies. Now we're whole." Later that evening, after everyone had gone and Catherine was sleeping peacefully in her crib, I sat on my patio looking at the stars. The woman I had been before, trusting, naive, desperate for approval, seemed like a stranger now. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely. It had transformed into something else. Strength, wisdom, boundaries made of steel. I received a message from Alexis. Thomas was up for his first parole hearing in 6 months. Did I want to submit a statement? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the decision. Part of me wanted to ensure he served every day of his sentence. Another part recognized that holding on to that anger required energy I now preferred to direct elsewhere. I typed a simple response. "No statement necessary. His actions have spoken for themselves." As I looked through the nursery door at my sleeping daughter, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. Thomas had taken so much, but he had ultimately given me something precious too, the opportunity to discover my own power, the chance to rebuild not just my financial security, but my entire identity on a foundation of truth. "We are not defined by what was done to us," I whispered to Catherine, though she couldn't hear me. "We are defined by how we rise afterward." And rise I had, from the ashes of betrayal to the summit of my own strength. Not perfect, not unscathed, but absolutely unquestionably free. In the end, perhaps that was the most satisfying